Exactly how the historical Jesus physically looked is nowhere as important as how he behaved. However, the question of how the first century Middle Eastern North African Jesus looked is not irrelevant, especially with the many blonde-haired, blue-eyed Jesuses abounding in film and holy images. But admittedly, it is easier to say how the historical Jesus most certainly did not look like than to attempt a photorealistic depiction of his exact physical appearance. Here are 3 ways Jesus certainly did not appear as, guaranteed by scholarly sources and ethnographic studies from abundant paleopathological evidence I will provide again and have already provided in presentations throughout this YouTube channel. 1. Jesus did not look like these actors. Including Jonathan Rumi, even with his Syro-Lebanese background. This is true for various reasons, and it is essential to recognize this fact.
We're all aware of the fact that, in the typical Hollywood Jesus movie, he was blonde and blue-eyed. So help me God, in the King of Kings, when he's on the cross, his armpits are shaved. I mean, it's totally nonsensical stuff.
But it is vital to realize that Jesus of history did not, and in fact could not, have behaved or interacted with people in the ways that these actors do in portraying him. Jesus did not originate in the Baltic culture continent. 2. Jesus did not look like any Ashkenazi person who has ever lived. The Jesus of history was Semitic. The Ashkenazim are not genetically, ethnically, historically, or culturally speaking Semitic. Please see the scholarly sources I cite later in this regard.
We followed 2 hypotheses in this work, comparing 2 possible scenarios. The left one in the blue is called the Rhineland hypothesis. This hypothesis presumes that at some point the Judeans were exiled to Rome in the year of 70. This, of course, event that has never happened. Shlomo Sand discussed that at length in his book, The Invention of the Jewish People. Let's moving on from this. After their arrival in Rome at some point, they presumably were released from captivity, migrated into Franconia, and then to the Rhineland, where they adopted some German dialect, and it turned out into Yiddish. And in the mid-13th century, mass migration to Eastern Europe, and at that point they experienced a demographic miracle that created a very large Jewish community. Needless to say, this miracle event, I don't need to mention that it is disputed. It is sufficient to say that it should not be considered science. However, you'd be surprised how many people write that in their papers as if this is a reasonable and viable explanation. The reason it is called demographic miracle is because it requires us to assume that Ashkenazi Jews reproduced experienced a baby boom expansion rate for 500 years. At a time where some of European nations have been contracted because of the Black Death and so forth. That growth rate is unimaginable, and it cannot be generated through normal reproduction rate. hence the demographic miracle. The alternative hypothesis, it's called the Slavo-Irano-Turkish hypothesis, suggests that at some point Iranian Jewry became very well developed, initially founded by travelers, supplemented by exiles from Israel and Judea, and of course, by that time, there was not much of Israel left, but the Judeans took the name Israel. At some point, those Jewish traders arrived to the Black Sea, Slavic lands, and crossed the Caucasus Mountains. They influenced religion reform in the Khazarian Empire, where the Khazar elite converted to Judaism. Many other people converted at the same time, including Slavs and other people who wanted to take part of this Jewish trade. At that time, they began using Praydish, the Slavic version of Yiddish. After Khazaria collapsed, those Jews penetrated Europe from the east. They moved west from the Khazarian Empire to Europe. After they arrived in Germany, they began adopting Germanic words into their Pre-Yiddish language that they had a Slavic base, Slavic grammar, and this is how Yiddish became to sound like German. And eventually they reached Western Europe and the remaining parts of Europe. Okay.
Jewishness and those belonging to the Jewish religion are under a large tent. Whereas Sephardim and Yemeni Jewish people and other Jewish groups do have Semitic ties, the Ashkenazim do not. And Jesus does not look like, speak like, behave like, or communicate like Israeli Jews of whatever group. So any portrayal of Jesus appearing or behaving or believing like and practicing like and acting like any of these people is anachronism. And whenever a Jewish scholar insists otherwise, this is a case of ethnocentric anachronism.
The New Testament, much of the New Testament is actually Jewish literature. And I find in reading it that I'm recovering some of my own Jewish history. If I want to know about Jewish women in the first century, the Gospels are a wonderful source. If I want to know about Pharisees or the synagogue system or how the temple functioned, again, the New Testament is an excellent source.
3. The historical Jesus, a Middle Eastern North African personality, did not look like any West African people or person. More importantly, he did not conform to the cultural modal personality of the diverse cultures and peoples of West Africa. Jesus is a first-century Galilean Israelite. The word Israelite can now be used in a non-literal or spiritual sense or religious sense. In such a non-literal understanding, Christians, Jews, and Muslims can all be thought of as spiritual Israelites, or Israelites in some religious way. But if you're using Israelite in a historical, genetic, ethnic, or cultural way, no one alive today on planet Earth is an Israelite. Folks, Christian and Christianity, Jews and Jewishness, and pagan are all 4th century Common Era realities. Any reality existing before this time labeled such is anachronism. Jewish scholars such as Jacob Neusner, Israeli historian Dr. Shlomo Sand, and Israeli-American geneticist and bioinformatician Eran El-Hayek have emphasized for decades now that the concept Jew as understood today derives not from first-century Israelites or Judeans, but from the 4th and following centuries Common Era. The terms Jew and Jewish, as we understand and use them, denote persons shaped by and oriented to the Mishnah, Midrashim, and Talmudim, not only the Torah. Similarly, the name Christian, as used and understood today, designates persons marked more by doctrines and events of the 4th and later centuries, such as Trinity of the Godhead, double natures of Christ, and consolidating a hierarchically structured universal church, than by those followers of Jesus in the 1st century. You know, it's been decades since Dr. Rosemary Radford Ruther explained that in the 4th century Common Era, Judaism and Christianity assumed the features they are known by today. And Jewish scholar Daniel Boyarin cites Ruther with approval and aptly describes both collectivities as twins in the womb until the 4th century CE. Therefore, to call Jesus, Paul, John the Seer, Peter, Mary, John the Dipper, or any other 1st century Israelites Jewish or Christian, as these words are understood and used in the vernacular today, not only confuses the matter historically and culturally and ethnically, but has birthed disastrous social and interreligious consequences. Calling the consequences disastrous is no hyperbole, I assure you. Want examples? The darkest, ugliest stain on the history of Christianity is hatred against Jewish people and groups. Consider the biblical and theological, quote, justifications, end quote, for genocidal hatred against Jewish people, lasting for centuries, because of the blood libel that Jewish people had Jesus crucified.
When I was in 2nd grade, a little girl accused me of having killed her Lord, because she had been taught that the Jews were responsible for the death of Jesus.
And also consider biblical and theological, quote, justifications, end quote, for the present genocidal hatred against Palestinians, confused as being Amalekites and Philistines, biblical enemies against the people of God who should be ethnically cleansed in Harem warfare.
Must remember what Amalek has done to you, says our Holy Bible, and we do remember, and we are fighting our brave troops and combatants who are now in Gaza or around Gaza and in all other regions in Israel are joining this chain of Jewish heroes, a chain that has started 3,000 years ago from Joshua ben Nun until the heroes of 1948, the Six-Day War, the 73 October War, and all other wars in this country.
Mitzvah number 604, so this is based on Deuteronomy 25:19, cut off the seed of Amalek, okay? That is, destroy them utterly, commit cherem against Amalek. And number 605, based on the same verse, blot out the memory of Amalek and don't forget Amalek. So extremist Messianic Israeli settlers often invoke Amalek as a justification for the massacre and displacement of the Palestinian people. And by the way, just the other day, the Israeli authorities in the West Bank were literally passing out assault rifles to Israeli settlers. I don't know if you saw that. I mean, settlers who are illegally occupying the West Bank now have assault weapons, military-grade weapons. But anyway, who is Amalek? So Amalek was the first nation to fight against the Israelites according to the Torah, right? So they're also called the Amalekites. So as you mentioned, 1 Samuel 15, King Saul was ordered by God to commit cherem against the Amalekites, to exterminate their men, women, and children and animals, total extermination. King Saul, however, spared the Amalekite king Agag. His name was Agag. Now, in the book of Esther, chapter 3, we're told that Haman, the Persian minister of Xerxes, was an Agagite. In other words, he was a descendant of Agag. In other words, he was an Amalekite. And Haman wanted to exterminate the Jews, according to Esther. So this is the MO of the Amalekites. They want to destroy Israel. This is a direct quote. The Palestinians are Amalek. We will destroy them, end quote. So now you understand what he means. I mean, he's invoking cherem, genocide of the Palestinian people. This goes back to something that you mentioned, Ilan Pape, right? The ethnic cleansing of Palestine. This is called Plan Dalet. Plan Dalet in 1947.
That's the Hebrew D. Yeah, Plan D.
The Hebrew D, exactly. Plan D, state enacted Israeli terrorism. So these are religious extremists drunk on messianic fervor. They're trying to inaugurate their messianic age with a massive human sacrifice. This is really evil stuff here.
In the lexicon entry on Judaios, in a Greek-English lexicon on the New Testament and other early Christian literature, scholar Frederick Danker laments that, quote, incalculable harm has been caused by simply glossing Judaios with Jew. For many readers or auditors of the Bible translations do not practice the historical judgment necessary to distinguish between circumstances and events of an ancient time and contemporary ethnic, religious, social realities, with the result that anti-Judaism, in the modern sense of the term, is needlessly fostered through biblical texts. Folks, the only possible way someone on earth today could be an Israelite would be in some religious or spiritual sense. But if we are talking about Israelite, historically, genetically, ethnically, or culturally, none exist today. Here are scholarly sources.